In a galaxy of war and betrayal, one human became more than an ally. He became hers, claimed by scent, by passion, and by destiny. Captain Glenn Tate gripped the manual flight controls of the Horizon with a steadiness born from years of training and more than a few brushes with death. The vessel hummed around him, a subtle vibration that told him she was still holding together after 3 weeks of deep space travel. Outside the cockpit window stretched the azure swirl of Elysium 9's upper atmosphere, a sight that should have filled any pilot with awe. Glenn allowed himself only a flicker of appreciation before returning his attention to the instruments. Awe didn't keep ships in the sky, discipline did. The planet below looked alive. Not in the sense of vegetation or oceans, though both were present, but alive as if it breathed. Cloud formations moved in organized spirals, glittering threads of energy. Storms crackled across the skies, and below them stretched forests that shimmered with bioluminescence. Beyond that, mountains jutted out like crystalline spears, their peaks gleaming under the twin moons. Glenn's lips pressed into a thin line. Beauty in space usually came with danger. "Horizon, this is Elysium Control," came the voice through his headset, calm and smooth. "You are cleared for landing at Docking Bay 17. Welcome to our world, Captain Tate." Glenn thumbed the comm. "Copy that, Control. Beginning final approach." His deep voice carried fatigue, a low timbre, edged with the weariness of weeks without proper rest. He adjusted the throttle, guiding the transport ship toward the glowing spires of the Nari capital, visible even from the stratosphere. The mission had been sold to him as simple ferry supplies, attend a ceremonial reception, and help open trade talks. But Glenn had been around long enough to recognize when information was missing. The United Earth Coalition never sent him into friendly territory without a briefing thick enough to double as a doorstop. This time he'd been given little more than smile, shake hands, don't offend the locals. That more than anything put him on edge. Hydraulics hissed as the Horizon descended onto the designated landing pad. Glenn exhaled, running a hand through his short-cropped dark hair, feeling the stubble on his jaw that had long passed regulation length. He caught a glimpse of himself in the darkened navigation screen. The scar running from temple to cheekbone stood out against his tanned skin. A reminder of the Centauri border conflict, a reminder that even survival carried marks. He unbuckled, stood, and stretched his broad shoulders against the flight suit that suddenly felt a size too small. "Time to make first contact," he muttered, grabbing his duffel and heading for the airlock. The ramp extended with a metallic groan. Glenn expected a delegation, diplomats, and ceremonial garb translators, perhaps even musicians playing strange alien instruments. Instead, there was one figure waiting, a woman, or more accurately, a female Nari warrior. She stood with the kind of presence that made the wide landing platform seem too small for her. Her skin shimmered with a faint sky-blue glow that caught the sunlight at every shift, giving the impression of liquid silk stretched over muscle and grace. Silver and black armor hugged her frame, dented and scarred in ways that spoke of real battles, not parade grounds. Her long, silver-white hair was braided back, exposing sharp cheekbones and eyes that glowed like twin stars. For a second too long, Glenn stared. His pulse quickened despite himself. "Captain Tate," she said, voice melodic, but with a steel undertone that brooked no weakness. "I am Commander Fila of the Nari Defense Force. I have been assigned as your liaison during your stay on Elysium 9. Glenn forced his focus, extending his hand in the human custom. "Pleasure to meet you, Commander. Looking forward to working together." Instead of taking his hand, she placed a fist against her chest in what he assumed was a salute. "The diplomatic reception has been postponed until tomorrow. I am to escort you to your quarters and brief you on our customs. So much for easing into things." Glenn adjusted the strap of his duffel as he followed her down the platform. He could feel eyes on him, female Nari officers and workers glancing openly, their stares lingering longer than was comfortable. Some made subtle gestures he couldn't decode. It was the kind of scrutiny that made a soldier want to check if his uniform was torn or his weapon unholstered. "Is there something wrong with my appearance?" Glenn asked quietly as they walked. Fila's expression barely shifted, but he caught the tightening around her jaw. "Human males are uncommon here. Your species' physical attributes are considered appealing to many Nari. Oh, Glenn said, suddenly very aware of every step he took. He wasn't used to being ogled like merchandise. The transport pod that whisked them from the landing bay was sleek, almost organic, with walls that seemed to pulse faintly as if the vehicle itself were alive. Through the transparent canopy, Glenn caught his first unobstructed view of the city. The capital of Elysium 9 didn't look built. It looked grown. Towers curved like vines reaching toward the sky surfaces, glimmering as though infused with liquid crystal. Bridges arched between spires glowing with soft blue energy, and below them rivers of light pulsed through the streets. It was alien, beautiful, and overwhelming in equal measure. Tomorrow we begin joint operations, Fila said, her tone crisp. Your ship will be integrated into our defense grid while trade negotiations proceed. You will work directly with my tactical team. Glenn frowned. I wasn't informed about military cooperation. My orders were diplomatic transport and trade facilitation. Plans change, Captain Fila replied smoothly. The Draconid incursions along our outer colonies have accelerated. Your coalition has agreed to provide support. That explained the lack of briefing. High Command had wanted to keep him flexible and uninformed. He bit back the irritation. It wasn't the first time Command had thrown him blind into a fire. Their pod slid to a stop before a towering structure of spiraling blue-green material that looked half metal, half living tissue. The residence loomed with a grandeur that made Glenn think of cathedrals, though there was something predatory in its elegance. Inside the atrium stretched high and wide, glowing with soft ambient light. It should have been welcoming, but the air thickened with tension as a group of female Nari officers turned to look at him. Their gazes were not curious. They were assessing, weighing as though he were prey worth hunting. One stepped forward, tall and striking with deep purple skin. Her movements were smooth, practiced, predatory. Commander Caveth, she purred, though her eyes never left Glenn. Is this the human pilot we've heard about? Perhaps he would enjoy a proper tour of our training facilities from someone more experienced. Glenn stiffened, recognizing the undertone. This wasn't simple curiosity, this was challenge. Beside him, Fila's posture hardened, her hand drifting near her weapon. Captain Tate is under my direct supervision by order of High Command, she said flatly. His schedule is already determined. The purple-skinned officer smiled, revealing teeth just sharp enough to unsettle. Of course. But should the captain desire additional cultural exchange, my quarters are in the East Wing. The tension was thick enough to cut. Glenn opened his mouth to respond, but the next moment would change everything. Fila moved suddenly, stepping between him and the lieutenant. Before Glenn could register what was happening, she pressed herself close, her luminous cheek brushing against his jawline. Slowly, deliberately, she rubbed her skin against his neck and shoulder, the motion sensual and primal. A faint scent of cinnamon and ozone clung to him instantly. Glenn froze, every nerve alight. The alien commander was marking him, claiming him in full view of her peers. The lieutenant's eyes widened, then narrowed. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her companions following. Fila straightened her face, once more unreadable. Your quarters are this way, Captain. We begin at first light. As the door sealed behind him in the suite assigned to him, Glenn touched the spot where she had rubbed against him. The scent lingered, subtle but undeniable. He exhaled, muttering to the empty room, "What the hell just happened?" Glenn lay on the edge of the alien bed, and its surface soft yet strangely warm, like some hybrid of memory foam and living moss. He should have been resting after the long flight, but the scent clinging to his skin, cinnamon and ozone mingled, kept him restless. No matter how much he scrubbed his neck, it lingered, subtle yet insistent, almost as if it had sunk beneath his skin. He muttered a curse under his breath, turning over again. This wasn't just a scent. It was a message, though one written in a language he didn't yet understand. When dawn's pale light filtered through the translucent walls, Glenn rose, showered and dressed in his formal coalition uniform. Midnight blue with silver trim, freshly pressed, it was designed to project authority and professionalism. He needed both today. His orders were diplomatic, his role clear, present, Earth's best face to an alien culture. Yet the events of the previous evening lingered like a weight on his chest. The knock at his door was firm, precise. Glenn opened it to find Fila standing there in full battle regalia. Her ceremonial armor gleamed silver plates polished to a mirror, finished with glowing bioluminescent trim, pulsing faintly in time with her heartbeat. She regarded him with luminous eyes that betrayed nothing of last night's incident. "You are ready," she said, more statement than question. "As I'll ever be," Glenn replied, falling into step beside her. The corridors of the diplomatic residence were alive with activity. Nari officers and attendants moved with purpose, though many paused to watch Glenn pass. The stares he had felt yesterday were magnified now sharp, and assessing, some filled with curiosity, others with unmistakable hunger. One female soldier murmured something under her breath to her companion, and both broke into low, throaty laughter as their eyes lingered on him. Glenn's skin prickled. He leaned closer to Fila. "I'm starting to feel like the main course at a banquet I didn't agree to attend." Fila's lips twitched, almost a smile almost. "Your presence is unusual. Unmated human males are considered desirable." He frowned. "Unmated, you make it sound like I'm a prize horse on display." She didn't answer, which only deepened his unease. They arrived at the vast reception hall of the Nari High Council. The architecture soared above them, arches of crystal-like material interwoven with veins of living energy. Luminescent orbs floated lazily near the ceiling, casting soft, shifting light over the assembled crowd. The air was thick with scents Glenn couldn't place, some floral, others sharp and musky. It was overwhelming, alien, and disorienting. At the entrance, Fila paused, scanning the crowd like a predator assessing threats. Glenn tugged at his collar, suddenly self-conscious under so many appraising gazes. He had faced down enemy pilots, stood before firing squads, and stared into the black void of space, but nothing had prepared him for being the center of attention in a hall filled with alien women who seemed to see him as something more than a diplomat. "You look acceptable," Fila murmured. Glenn raised an eyebrow. "Just acceptable. I thought I cleaned up nicely." For the first time, a faint blush darkened Fila's skin tone to a deeper blue. "You know perfectly well how you look, which is precisely why I will remain close tonight." Before Glenn could retort, a herald announced them. Captain Glenn Tate of the United Earth Coalition and Commander Fila of the Nari Defense Force. Every head turned. Glenn felt the weight of dozens of gazes, most female, some curious, some outright predatory. The air thickened with tension. He straightened his shoulders, forcing himself into the calm, commanding presence of an officer. A deep voice boomed from across the hall. A massive Nari male approached, his skin a darker shade than Fila's, his armor heavily adorned with rank insignia. "I am High Commander Torin Kaval. We are honored by your presence, Captain Tate." Glenn saluted crisply. "The honor is mine, High Commander. The Coalition values this opportunity to strengthen our alliance." Kaval's eyes flicked briefly to Fila, then back to Glenn with a knowing glint. "I see Commander Caveth has already made you comfortable on our world." Fila stepped imperceptibly closer, her shoulder brushing Glenn's. The contact sent an electric shiver down his spine. "Captain Tate and I will be working closely on the Joint Defense Initiative," she said firmly. The High Commander's expression remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a recognition, an approval, or perhaps amusement that made Glenn's stomach tighten. As the evening unfolded, the situation grew more intense. Female Nari officers, diplomats, and even aristocrats circled Glenn like sharks scenting blood. They found excuses to touch his arm, to stand too close, to whisper offers of private tours and cultural exchanges. Glenn's diplomatic training told him to smile, nod, and deflect politely, but every interaction frayed his composure a little more. And each time, Fila was there. Sometimes she would place a hand possessively on his shoulder. Sometimes she would brush her cheek against his arm, leaving that cinnamon ozone scent clinging to his uniform. The gestures were subtle to human eyes, but the reaction from the surrounding Nari was immediate. Whispers spread, glances shifted, and the competition seemed to retreat, at least temporarily. Finally, during a lull in the festivities, Glenn pulled Fila aside to a quiet alcove overlooking the city skyline. The capital glittered beneath the night sky, its spires glowing like stars. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Are you going to explain what's happening?" he asked, his voice low-edged with both amusement and exasperation. "Every female in this room looks at me like I'm the last piece of chocolate in the galaxy, and you're acting like a bodyguard fending off admirers. Fila's luminous eyes narrowed. You researched our customs, did you not? I tried. The coalition database was vague. Something about territorial instincts and pheromones, not exactly detailed. She sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. Nari females are territorial, especially during certain cycles. When I marked you yesterday, I was following instinct. Glenn blinked. So you claimed me. Like property. He tried to sound offended, but curiosity bled through. Not property, she corrected sharply. Compatibility. The scent marking warns others that preliminary negotiations are underway. Negotiations. Glenn leaned against the railing, studying her. Do I get any say in them? The corner of Fila's mouth twitched upward. You didn't push me away, Captain. Heat crept up Glenn's neck as he remembered his hands awkwardly gripping her waist, the intimacy of the moment. I was caught off guard. Were you? She murmured, stepping closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Your pupils dilated, your heart rate increased, your body temperature rose, all biological indicators of attraction in humans, according to our xenobiology texts. You've been studying human physiology, Glenn asked suddenly, very aware of her nearness. Thoroughly, she replied, her eyes locking onto his. Your species is fascinating. So similar to ours, yet your customs are riddled with inefficiencies. Words where instinct would suffice. Rituals where action is more honest. The air between them grew heavy charged. Glenn felt himself leaning closer, drawn by something primal, something that defied species or culture. Lieutenant Terrace is watching us, Fila whispered, her breath warm against his ear. Glenn glanced past her shoulder. Indeed, the purple-skinned lieutenant stood across the hall, eyes fixed on them with a glare equal parts challenge and calculation. She still believes she can contest my claim, Fila continued. And what happens if she does? Glenn asked, his voice rougher than intended. Traditionally, Fila said, her lips curving into a smile that was both predatory and playful combat. Before Glenn could react, she closed the distance. Her lips pressed against his in a kiss that began as a declaration of dominance, but quickly transformed into something deeper, something neither could deny. Glenn froze for a heartbeat, then instinct took over. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, the hall had gone noticeably quieter. Dozens of eyes were fixed on them, some approving, some scandalized, others openly envious. Well, Glenn said, breathless, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. That was certainly direct. Fila's eyes gleamed satisfaction and something more primal shining in them. The negotiations have advanced, Captain Tate. Glenn, he corrected softly. If we're negotiating, you should use my first name. She tested it on her tongue. Glenn. The sound was both intimate and possessive. And in that moment, beneath the glowing spires of Elysium 9, surrounded by stairs both hostile and intrigued, Glenn Tate realized he was in far deeper than he had imagined. The reception hall blazed with color and sound, a storm of alien elegance and subtle menace. Glenn found himself swept into the tide of introductions, handshakes replaced with chest-class salutes, small talk laced with undercurrents he barely understood. Fila stayed close, her silver-white braid catching the light as she subtly guided him through the throng. Her presence was both a shield and a chain, keeping predators at bay while reminding him of the invisible mark she had pressed into his skin. Platters of food glided past on hovering trays, strange meats sizzling against crystalline plates, fruits that glowed faintly as if charged with energy. Drinks shimmered in iridescent hues that changed color with every tilt of the glass. Glenn sampled cautiously the flavors, sharp and alien, and the alcohol stronger than any whiskey he had known. Each taste grounded him in the fact that he wasn't on Earth anymore. He was in the heart of a culture that had its own rules, its own desires, and its eyes fixed squarely on him. A tall Nari aristocrat approached her gown woven of living fabric that shifted colors with her mood. She smiled with predatory grace, eyes glittering as they locked on Glenn. Captain Tate, is it? Your species is even more striking than rumor suggested. Tell me, do humans truly bond for life, or is that merely romantic propaganda? Glenn forced a diplomatic smile. We value loyalty. Commitment means something to us. Commitment, she echoed, tasting the word like wine. How quaint. Perhaps you'd allow me to test your species' commitment personally. Her hand drifted toward his arm. Before her fingers touched, Fila's voice cut in smooth as steel. Captain Tate's time is accounted for. High Command has already determined his schedule. The aristocrat arched an eyebrow, her gown flashing red, the color of challenge. How convenient. Tell me, Commander, is your interest in him purely professional? The words carried across the hall, drawing curious glances. Glenn's pulse quickened. The air seemed to tighten, the tension palpable. Fila's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Instead, she stepped closer, her shoulder brushing Glenn's, deliberately leaving behind that familiar scent. The aristocrat's smile faltered. With a hiss of disdain, she turned and melted back into the crowd. Glenn exhaled. I feel like I just watched two predators circle a kill. Fila's eyes narrowed. She will not circle again. The point has been made. The evening wore on, but the pattern repeated. A diplomat from the agricultural ministry cornered him with questions that veered suspiciously toward personal matters. A military officer asked with mock innocence whether human males were truly as durable in bed as the whispers claimed. Every interaction seemed to strip away layers of diplomacy until Glenn felt less like a guest and more like a contested prize. Through it all, Fila shadowed him. Her proximity calculated, her touches deliberate. Each time another Nari female leaned too close, Fila would brush her cheek against his shoulder or touch his arm with possessive familiarity. To human eyes, it might have looked subtle, even intimate, but to the Nari, it was a declaration this human has claimed. Glenn endured it with as much grace as he could muster, though frustration bubbled beneath the surface. Finally, during a quiet moment by the balcony, he muttered, "You realize you're making me the center of a political storm, right?" Fila's gaze flicked to him, luminous eyes intense. "Better you storm with me than be torn apart alone." Before he could respond, movement across the hall drew his attention. Lieutenant Terrace had arrived. Her purple skin gleamed under the light, her armor ceremonial, yet sharp-edged, her posture radiating confidence. The crowd parted subtly as she approached, the whispers trailing in her wake. "Captain Tate," she said smoothly, though her eyes were locked on Fila. "You shine tonight. Tell me, has your guide explained the deeper meaning of her attentions?" Glenn stiffened. "I've gathered a few hints." Terrace's smile was sharp. "Hints are dangerous. Without full knowledge, one can easily become trapped. Perhaps you'd prefer a more thorough education from someone with broader experience." It was a challenge, naked and direct. Glenn opened his mouth, but Fila stepped forward, her voice low and dangerous. "Your attempts are wasted, Lieutenant. The captain has already been marked." Terrace's laugh was rich and mocking. "Marked, that is instinct, not choice. Do you believe a human will accept such primitive claims? He is not a cub to be lured by pheromones." The surrounding crowd leaned closer, the hall humming with anticipation. Glenn felt like prey once more, caught between predators. "I don't think," he began, but Fila cut him off, her hand pressing firmly to his chest. She leaned in, brushing her cheek against his neck again, rubbing slowly, deliberately. The scent bloomed rich and undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Glenn's mind reeled, but instinct betrayed him. His hands rose, steadying her at the waist, not pushing her away, but holding her awkward yet intimate. The contact sparked something primal, something that bypassed reason entirely. Terrace's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed as whispers surged around them. The message was clear. The human was claimed publicly and irrevocably. Yet Terrace did not retreat. She leaned close, voice pitched for Glenn's ears alone. "Claims can be broken. Remember that, human." With a final glare at Fila, she turned and stalked away, her cloak swirling like a storm cloud. The hall buzzed with speculation. Glenn's cheeks burned under the scrutiny. He forced a smile, nodding politely at the onlookers, but inside his chest, his heart hammered like a war drum. When at last the crowd's attention shifted elsewhere, Glenn pulled Fila aside, his voice a sharp whisper. "What the hell was that? You just turned me into the centerpiece of a political spectacle." Fila met his gaze without flinching. "Better spectacle than vulnerability. You think they would not have torn at you piece by piece without a shield?" That was a shield he demanded. It felt a hell of a lot like possession. Her eyes softened just slightly. "Possession is not the word. protection, perhaps, or compatibility. Glenn shook his head, running a hand through his hair. You're playing by rules I don't even know exist. Then learn, she said simply. Her tone left no room for argument. And yet beneath the iron edge of her words, Glenn thought he caught something else: fear. Not fear of terrorists or of politics, but fear of losing something she hadn't yet put into words. The reception continued, but for Glenn the evening was a blur. He played his part, smiling, conversing, enduring the hungry gazes and whispered insinuations. Yet every time Fila's scent brushed against him, every time her luminous eyes met his, he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He wasn't just navigating alien politics anymore. He was being drawn into something deeper, something primal, something dangerous. Later, as the hall quieted and the crowd dispersed, Fila escorted him back to his quarters. At the door, she paused, her expression unreadable. Tomorrow, she said, her voice low, we begin joint operations. Rest, Captain. Glenn caught her arm before she could turn away. Fila, he said softly, the name strange but natural on his tongue. What happens if I don't want to be part of your customs? What if I want to make my own choice? For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her luminous eyes. She stepped closer, her breath warm against his ear. Then make it. Push me away. Deny the mark. But you didn't, Glenn. You welcomed it. Before he could reply, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that stole his breath. It was not the predatory declaration of before, it was something more intimate, more dangerous. When she pulled back, her eyes glowed with fierce satisfaction. The negotiations, she whispered, are complete. The door slid shut behind her, leaving Glenn alone once more. He touched his lips, still tingling, and whispered into the silence, God help me. What am I getting into? The quarters assigned to Glenn were far more luxurious than any soldier should be accustomed to. The walls were translucent, shifting subtly with the ambient light of Elysium's twin moons, casting the room in hues of silver and blue. Furniture seemed grown rather than constructed, its organic shapes cradling comfort into design. A balcony opened to the alien skyline spires, glowing like beacons in the distance. But Glenn barely noticed any of it. His thoughts were still caught in the echo of the kiss outside the reception hall, the taste of her, the warmth of her skin, the way she had looked at him as though the entire hall had vanished. He had kissed women before, had relationships before, but nothing in his life had prepared him for the intensity of Fila Cavith. He paced the room, running a hand over his face, trying to will away the confusion. Was it pheromones, instinct? Or was it something more dangerous, something real? A soft chime startled him. The door slid open without his command. Fila stepped inside. She was no longer clad in ceremonial armor. Instead, she wore a simple garment of flowing fabric silver that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. It clung to her form, accentuating the lines of muscle and grace. Without the weight of armor, she looked less like a commander and more like a woman, though still every bit as formidable. Glenn's throat went dry. Commander Immunity. Fila, she corrected, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. Tonight it is only Fila. The door whispered shut behind her, sealing them in. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The silence was charged heavy with everything left unsaid. Then slowly she crossed the room. Glenn found himself rooted in place as she stopped before him. Her luminous eyes searched his face as if gauging not just his expression, but the truth beneath his skin. Finally, she lifted a hand, tracing the scar that ran from temple to cheekbone. This mark, she murmured, a wound earned in battle. You carry it as proof of survival. Glenn caught her wrist gently. We all carry scars, some visible, some not. Her lips curved in a faint smile. Then perhaps tonight we share them. The words were not a question, but an invitation. Glenn's resistance crumbled under the weight of it. He bent, closing the distance, their lips meeting in a kiss that burned away hesitation. This was not the calculated declaration of the hall. This was hunger raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Her hands slid across his shoulders, gripping tightly as though afraid he might vanish. His own arms circled her waist, pulling her against him. The fabric of her garment was cool, but beneath it her skin radiated heat. When they parted, both were breathless, their foreheads pressed together. You feel it too, Fila whispered. It was not a question. Glenn swallowed hard. I don't know what I feel, but I know I don't want it to stop. She smiled predatory and tender all at once. Then don't. What followed was not the fumbling passion of strangers, nor the polished rituals of seasoned lovers. It was something in between exploration and discovery, the collision of two species testing limits. Their bodies aligned in surprising ways, familiar, yet different, each touch, sparking curiosity as much as desire. There were awkward moments, a laugh when an unexpected sensitivity made Glenn jerk a gasp when her markings glowed brighter at his touch. But laughter bled into heat and heat into fire. The night stretched around them, the city's glow painting their skin in shades of silver and blue. Their voices filled the room, sometimes moans, sometimes murmured words, sometimes nothing but the rhythm of breath. It was both primal and intimate, a dance that blurred the line between instinct and choice. Later, they lay tangled in the sheets, bodies damp with sweat, hearts still racing. Glenn stared at the ceiling, watching the interplay of light. He should have felt guilt, or at least caution. Instead, he felt something he hadn't expected in years, peace. Beside him, Fila stirred. She propped herself on one elbow, her silver-white hair spilling like liquid moonlight across the pillow. Her eyes glowed softly as she studied him. With a slow hand, she traced the line of his jaw. "You're staring," she murmured. Admiring, Glenn corrected with a faint grin. "Your skin catches the light differently. It's beautiful." She tilted her head, amused. "Humans use words so clumsily, but I believe you mean it." "I do." Silence fell again, companionable this time. Then her expression shifted, serious, almost solemn. "Among my people," she said quietly, "what we share tonight is not casual. It is binding." Glenn frowned. "Binding how?" "Not marriage as you define it, but more than a fleeting encounter. A claiming made physical, a bond acknowledged." He searched her face, so this wasn't just instinct. Her eyes locked on his, luminous and unwavering. Instinct began it, choice completed it. The words sank into him, heavy with implication. Glenn wasn't a stranger to bonds, to loyalty, but this was different. This wasn't a contract signed in ink or a vow sworn before commanders. This was biology and choice entwined, woven into something he didn't yet fully understand. "And if I regret it?" he asked carefully. Her hand froze against his skin. "Do you?" Glenn considered the question honestly. The night had been unexpected, overwhelming, even reckless. But regret? He shook his head slowly. "No, not a single moment." Relief softened her features. She leaned down, pressing a kiss to his scar, as if sealing the words. "Then neither do I." For a time they lay in silence again, bodies entwined, the weight of the night settling around them. Yet even in that peace, Glenn felt the undercurrent of tension. This wasn't just passion. This was politics, culture, survival. What they had done was more than private. It was a symbol. He thought of the whispers in the hall, the way Terrace had looked at him, the gleam in the High Commander's eyes. This bond would not go unnoticed. It would ripple through Nari society like a stone dropped in a still pond. But as Fila's breathing evened beside him, as her body pressed warm and trusting against his, Glenn pushed those thoughts aside. For this night, at least, the war outside their walls could wait. The dawn would come soon enough, and with it the consequences. The gentle glow of morning filtered through the translucent walls, but peace lasted only minutes. Glenn and Fila stirred almost simultaneously, both reaching instinctively for their communication devices as a sharp alert tone cut through the room. "Emergency briefing in 30 minutes. Fila read aloud, her voice clipped, already shifting into commander mode. She swung out of bed, muscles taut, luminous eyes hardening with focus. Glenn scanned his own device. Draconid activity, a scout formation detected at the edge of the system. He sat up, pulling on his uniform with practiced efficiency. The intimacy of the night before evaporated in an instant, replaced by the cold clarity of duty. As Fila fastened the last piece of her armor, she hesitated, meeting his gaze. "Glenn, what happened between us, it was not only instinct or desire, but you must understand, High Command will see it as more." Glenn adjusted the collar of his uniform. "More how?" "Symbolic. Politically significant. A human and a Nari forming a bond. It strengthens the image of our alliance. Some may support it. Others will see it as corruption." His jaw tightened. So last night was, what, a strategic maneuver? Her eyes flashed anger and vulnerability mingling. No, what we shared was real. But yes, others will use it for strategy. That is the reality we face. Glenn took a steadying breath, compartmentalizing the emotions surging within him. He had been a soldier too long to let personal turmoil cloud his judgment. We'll deal with it later. Right now we have a job to do. The command center pulsed with activity. Tactical displays illuminated the chamber showing the Draconid scout formation approaching the system. The reptilian ships resembled their crews, sleek, predatory, and built for ambush. High Commander Torrin Caval stood at the center, surrounded by senior officers. Beside him, Lieutenant Terrace lingered, her posture sharp, her purple skin gleaming under the lights. Glenn caught the way her eyes lingered on him, cold and calculating. Our sensors detected the Draconid scouts 6 hours ago, Terrace reported. They are moving in a pattern consistent with pre-invasion reconnaissance. Show me their trajectory, Glenn said, stepping forward. His military instincts overrode any protocol. The display shifted, showing vectors across the system. Glenn frowned, tracing the pattern. This is wrong, they're being too obvious. Fila glanced at him. Explain. Draconids are ambush predators. They don't move openly unless they want to be seen. He tapped the map. This isn't scouting, it's diversion. I'd bet my ship there's another force massing behind the star's approach vector. Murmurs rippled through the officers. Terrace's eyes narrowed. That is conjecture. No, Glenn said firmly. It's doctrine. Humans use the same tactic in the Centauri conflict. Hide behind the star, let your scouts draw attention, then strike from the blind spot. Caval studied him, then gave a sharp nod. Recalibrate the sensor array, scan the solar vectors. Moments later, alarms blared. The display flared with red icons, dozens of Draconid vessels emerging from behind the sun. Not a scouting party, but a fleet. Battle group confirmed, an officer shouted. At least 30 vessels, including what appears to be a command carrier. The chamber fell into taut silence. Then Caval's voice rang out. Commander Cavith, Captain Tate, you will lead the intercept mission. The Nari interceptor screamed through space. Glenn at the controls, Fila beside him, working the tactical console. The stars blurred as they rolled hard to avoid a barrage of enemy fire. Shields at 63%. Fila reported, fingers flying over the interface. 2 Draconid fighters on our tail. Hang on. Glenn banked sharply, the sleek craft responding to his every command. Years of combat flying had honed him to react faster than thought. He dropped into a dive, engines flaring, then cut power abruptly, letting the fighters overshoot. A burst from the interceptor's cannons sent one ship spiraling into debris. But the second struck true. The port engine erupted in flame alarms, screaming through the cockpit. The craft lurched violently, spinning toward the nearby moon of Phoebe. Direct hit, Fila shouted. Engine 3 is gone, shields failing. Glenn wrestled with the controls, sweat beading on his brow. We're not making it back to Elysium 9, plotting emergency landing trajectory. Phoebe's surface. Fila's eyes widen. It's barely habitable. Thin atmosphere, minimal resources. Better than vacuum, Glenn grunted. Brace. The interceptor plunged toward the barren gray moon, trailing smoke and debris. Glenn fought the descent with every ounce of skill, leveling out just enough to avoid catastrophic impact. The ship slammed into the surface, skidding across rock before grinding to a shuddering halt in a shallow crater. For a moment, silence reigned. Glenn coughed, unstrapping himself. You alive? Fila winced, unbuckling. Indigo blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. Your landing skills need work, Captain. Despite everything, Glenn barked a short laugh. Critics everywhere. He checked the systems. Engines fried. Life support on backup. Communications jammed. Fila's expression hardened. Draconid jamming protocol. They're cutting us off from command. They gathered emergency supplies and stepped onto Phoebe's desolate surface. The sky was pitch black, the massive gas giant looming above like a watchful eye. In the distance, flashes of light marked the ongoing battle. There's a research outpost 20 kilometers north, Fila said, consulting her tactical pad. Automated facility, but it has comms equipment powerful enough to cut through the jamming. 20 kilometers in this gravity and atmosphere, Glenn calculated. That's a day's hike. They set off across the barren terrain, their breaths fogging inside their helmets. Hours passed in silence, each step heavy in the thin air. Finally, as Phoebe's night cycle approached temperatures plummeting, they found shelter in a shallow cave. Inside, Glenn unfolded thermal blankets. The silence between them stretched until Fila finally spoke, her voice low. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier about my marking you." Glenn paused, looking up. "You were right to be angry. High Command did see strategic value in our bond. I should have told you." She moved closer, her luminous eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "But you must believe me, Glenn. Nari females cannot mark without genuine attraction. Our pheromones do not activate without it. Politics may benefit from it, but the choice was mine. And it was real." Glenn studied her face. There was no deception there, only earnestness. Slowly he nodded. "I believe you. But something else is bothering me. The Draconids knew exactly where to find us. That's not chance." Her eyes narrowed. "You think we have a traitor?" "I think Lieutenant Terrace's interest in me wasn't just rivalry," Glenn said grimly. "She was too eager to know our patrol route, too well informed." Fila hesitated, uncertainty flickering. "Terrace has served High Command for years, which would make her the perfect mole," Glenn countered. He pulled up his pad, showing her the transmission logs. "Our intercept course was transmitted to all staff 8 minutes before launch. Plenty of time for someone to leak it." Her expression hardened, jaw tight. "If you're right, Elysium-9 is in greater danger than any of us realized." The temperature in the cave dropped sharply, forcing them to huddle beneath the blankets. The closeness was as much necessity as comfort. Glenn felt her hand slip into his fingers, intertwining. "If we survive this," he whispered, "what happens to us? Beyond the politics, beyond the war." Fila pressed closer, her breath warm against his ear. "A claiming is not easily undone, nor would I wish it to be. Even though you are human with all your unpredictability and reckless customs, I choose it. I choose you." Glenn chuckled softly. "Reckless stubbornness, that's what we call it." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps that is what I love most." Outside, the flashes of battle lit the cave entrance in bursts of light and shadow. Inside, two warriors, alien and human, clung to each other against the cold, bound by instinct, by choice, and by the storm of war, closing in around them. Phoebe's night cycle crept over the barren landscape, bringing with it a cold that bit straight through the thermal blankets. Glenn and Fila rose at first light, though light was a generous word for the dim glow filtering across the cratered surface. Their bodies were stiff from the hike and crash, but resolve hardened in both of them. They set out again toward the research outpost, trudging across the gray wasteland. Hours passed, boots crunching against dust that never shifted, the gas giant looming like a silent sentinel above them. Conversation was scarce breath, too precious to waste in the thin atmosphere. Yet in their silence, Glenn sensed an unspoken bond strengthening. Last night had forged something beyond instinct, a commitment, though neither had dared name it aloud. Finally, the outpost came into view, a dome-shaped facility nestled in a shallow crater, its communication arrays jutting into the sky like skeletal fingers. Relief surged through Glenn, tempered by the sight of movement near the entrance. "Draconid scouts," he muttered, lowering the tactical binoculars. "Two at the main entrance, two patrolling." Fila's jaw clenched. "Advanced team. They must be setting up a forward relay. If they secure this outpost, Elysium-9's defenses will be blind." Glenn studied the patrol pattern. "We need to take them out quietly. You handle the entrance. I'll deal with the patrol." Her silver-white braids shimmered as she nodded. "Confident in your abilities, Captain." A wry smile tugged at his lips. "I've seen what those Nari muscles can do. Time to show you how reckless stubbornness works." They split, circling the outpost. Glenn stalked the patrol, his body moving on muscle memory, honed over years of combat. When the first Draconid rounded the corner, Glenn struck knife, sliding into the vulnerable seam beneath his jaw. The second whipped around, hissing weapon raised. Glenn ducked under the energy blast, rolling forward. His fist slammed into the creature's throat, crushing cartilage. A swift follow-up strike ensured silence. Across the compound, Fila moved like liquid steel, her blade flashing in efficient arcs. The two guards crumpled before they could even cry out. She glanced at Glenn, their eyes meeting in silent acknowledgement. Clear. Inside the outpost was eerily still, the hum of machines the only sound. They secured the command hub, and Glenn went straight to the console. Good news, the long-range transmitter's intact. Bad news, Draconid set up a system-wide jamming field. We'll only get one shot at punching through. Can you target defense headquarters, Fila asked. Already working on it, Glenn muttered, fingers flying over the alien interface. But once we transmit, they'll trace the signal. We'll have minutes before this place is rubble. The console flickered. After a tense pause, a face appeared, a young Nari officer, clearly nervous. This is Outpost Phoebe. 3 calling Defense Command, Glenn said urgently. We need High Commander Caval immediately. The officer's eyes widened. Captain Tate, Commander Cavith, stand by. The screen went blank, then returned with a different officer. His voice was stiff. High Commander is unavailable. Lieutenant Terrace has assumed temporary command. Fila's blood ran cold. What do you mean assumed command? She claims the High Commander was compromised by human influence, the young officer said quickly. Half the fleet follows her orders now. Glenn's stomach sank. She staged a coup. Not exactly, the officer said, lowering his voice. She says she's protecting Nari interests against both the Draconids and human contamination. Many believe her. He hesitated, then added, she's ordered all human personnel confined, and any Nari marked by humans detained for decontamination. Fila's skin paled to a lighter shade of blue. Decontamination was a euphemism she knew all too well. It meant forced pheromone purging, a painful, dangerous process. The officer's gaze darted nervously over his shoulder. I'll transmit what I can. Many of us still believe in the Alliance. Don't give up on us. The transmission ended, replaced by streams of data. Glenn scoured the logs, his jaw tightening. Here, he pointed. Encrypted signals, outgoing transmissions from Terrace's quarters to an unregistered receiver. Timestamps line up with Draconid fleet movements. Fila leaned closer, her scent wrapping around him even in the sterile air. Proof, enough to expose her. Glenn's voice hardened. Then we need to get this back to the Loyalists. Not hidden, not whispered. Public. If we try to slip it through quietly, she'll bury it. Fila's luminous eyes locked on his. Public exposure will tear the High Council apart. He met her gaze unflinching. Better torn apart than controlled by a traitor. We land right in the plaza in front of everyone and drop the evidence where the whole world can see it. She stared at him for a long moment, then gave a slow, fierce smile. That is incredibly reckless. Human stubbornness, Glenn said with a grin. Told you. But before they could leave, Fila pulled him into an alcove, pressing close, her lips crushing against his. It wasn't playful this time. It was fierce, desperate, and filled with urgency. When she broke away, her eyes blazed. If we go back into that chaos, you must know something, she whispered. By Nari custom, what we've shared, the marking the bond, it means you are mine, and I am yours. Whatever happens, that truth does not change. Glenn cupped her face, pressing his forehead to hers. Where I come from, we say till death do us part. A shiver ran through her. Then perhaps our species are not so different. Their moment of intimacy burned hot but brief. Duty pulled them back. They sprinted to the shuttle bay, where an atmospheric craft waited, powered down but intact. Glenn brought systems online while Fila loaded the datapad with the evidence. As the engines roared to life, she strapped in beside him. You realize Terrace will have security cordons in place. She'll try to intercept us before we reach the council. Then we don't sneak, Glenn said, banking the craft toward the capital. We go loud, public, force the truth into the open. Fila stared at him, then laughed softly, admiration in her voice. Your species is insane. Go big or go home, Glenn quipped, throttling forward. The shuttle streaked toward Elysium 9, hugging the terrain to avoid detection until the last possible moment. Then as they neared the capital, Glenn activated the external comm system. His voice rang across open frequencies, broadcast to every ear tuned to the city. Citizens of Elysium 9, he declared, this is Captain Glenn Tate of the United Earth Coalition with Commander Fila Cavith of the Nari Defense Force. We have proof of Lieutenant Terrace's collaboration with the Draconids. We are landing in Central Plaza to address the High Council. Fila's eyes widened. You just announced our presence to everyone, including Terrace. Glenn grinned, teeth flashing. Exactly. The shuttle banked sharply, angling toward the glittering heart of the capital. Below them, the plaza was already in chaos. Crowds of civilians, soldiers torn between orders, and Terrace's security forces forming lines of uncertain allegiance. Fila reached for his hand, squeezing hard. "Reckless," she whispered. "Yeah," Glenn replied, "but sometimes reckless is the only way forward." Together they braced as the shuttle descended into the storm of politics, betrayal, and war, waiting in the heart of Elysium 9. The shuttle descended with a roar, repulsor scattering dust and sparks across Central Plaza. Crowds surged in every direction, some shouting in confusion, others cheering, still others hissing in disapproval at the sight of the human and the Nari commander standing side by side. Glenn powered down the engines, his jaw set. "Once we step out, there's no going back." Fila's grip tightened on her blade hilt. "Then let's step out together." The hatch hissed open and they emerged shoulder to shoulder. The sunlight caught on Fila's silver-white hair, casting her in a glow almost divine. Glenn's uniform, torn and dust-stained from the crash, somehow made him look even more like the soldier he was, battle-worn, unyielding. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Cries rose, the human corruptor clashing with. They fought the Draconids together. Soldiers shifted uneasily, weapons half raised but uncertain. A line of security officers formed a blockade. Their leader, a stern-faced Nari male, stepped forward. "Commander Caveth, by order of Acting Commander Terrace, you are to report for decontamination. The human will be detained." Fila's hand twitched toward her weapon, but Glenn placed a steadying hand on her arm. Instead of answering the officer, he lifted his voice to the crowd. "People of Elysium 9. His words rang out, amplified by the shuttle's comm system. The plaza fell into a tense hush. "You've been told that humans are corrupting your kind, that our bonds are weakness. But ask yourselves, while you argue over purity, who benefits? The Draconids are at your doorstep, and a traitor has already given them the keys to your defense shield." A ripple of murmurs surged through the crowd. Fila stepped forward, raising the datapad. "We have proof, intercepted transmissions from Lieutenant Terrace to the Draconid fleet. She fed them our positions. She betrayed High Command, betrayed you." The officer faltered, uncertainty flickering across his face. The crowd stirred uneasily, some shouting accusations, others disbelief. Before the momentum could build, the great doors of the council chamber slammed open. Lieutenant Terrace strode out, flanked by heavily armed guards. Her purple skin gleamed like polished steel, her eyes burning with cold fury. "Arrest them," she commanded, her voice slicing through the plaza. "The human has poisoned Commander Caveth. They bring lies and fabricated evidence to weaken us before the Draconids strike." Her words stirred a wave of anger through her supporters. Soldiers leveled weapons. The crowd roared with competing voices. But before her guards could advance, a new figure pushed through the chaos, High Commander Caval himself. His armor bore scorch marks, his limp betrayed fresh wounds, but his presence commanded silence. "Is that what happened, Terrace?" His deep voice boomed across the square. "Or did you stage a coup while I fought to hold our orbital platforms against the very enemy you now serve?" Terrace's composure faltered, but she quickly recovered. "High Commander, I acted to protect our people. The humans are changing us, diluting what it means to be Nari. Their pheromones." No Fila's voice cracked like a whip, silencing her. She stepped forward, luminous eyes blazing. "They are showing us what we can become. Stronger, adaptive, resilient. The bond Glenn and I share is not corruption, it is strength." Gasps rippled through the plaza as she reached back, taking Glenn's hand in full view of all. Fingers intertwined, their bond visible, undeniable. Terrace's face twisted in rage. "You damn yourself before your people. The Draconid fleet is vast. We cannot win. Submission is survival." Glenn laughed, a sharp, fearless sound that startled even the crowd. Spoken like someone who has never seen humans fight when cornered. "Impossible odds. That's where we thrive. We don't bend. We don't surrender. We adapt. We overcome." For a moment, silence held. Then a thunderous chime sounded overhead. All eyes turned skyward. The planetary defense shield shimmered violently, rippling under the relentless pounding of the Draconid main fleet. Dozens of impact points glowed as enemy weapons hammered the barrier. Caval's expression hardened. "They've begun their assault, and thanks to Terrace, they have our access codes." Panic rippled through the plaza. Terrace, sensing her grip slipping, shouted desperately, Seize them now. But her command was met with hesitation. Soldiers glanced at each other at the data pad still in Fila's grip, at the High Commander standing firmly at Glenn's side. Then one by one weapons lowered. Caval raised his arm. Detain Terrace and her followers. She will answer for her treachery. Terrace's eyes wide in fury, giving way to desperation. You fools, you'll all die clinging to your delusions. She struggled as guards seized her, her cries drowned beneath the roar of the crowd, some cheering, her capture, others still shouting in fear. Glenn turned to Caval. We don't have time for trials. The fleet is already hammering your defenses. We need to get to the control center now. Caval nodded grimly. Agreed. Captain Tate, Commander Cavith, with me. As they pushed through the throng, Fila's hand brushed Glenn's, a fleeting touch that carried both reassurance and urgency. That speech of yours, she murmured, reckless. Bold. Very human. Did it work? Glenn asked, flashing a grin despite the chaos. Her luminous eyes softened even amidst the storm. For the first time in days, I believe it did. Behind them, Terrace's screams echoed as she was dragged away. Ahead, the sky blazed with light as the Draconids hammered at the weakening shield. The battle for Elysium 9 was about to begin, and this time their bond would be tested not in whispers or stolen moments, but in fire and blood. The Defense Control Center of Elysium 9 buzzed with frantic energy as Glenn Fila and High Commander Caval stormed through its towering doors. Dozens of technicians scrambled at consoles' holo displays, projected tactical maps across the chamber, and a constant stream of alerts screamed as the planetary shield faltered under the Draconid assault. Status report, Caval barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. A weary technician looked up from his station. Shield integrity at 62% and dropping. The Draconids are systematically targeting weak points using access codes. Total collapse estimated in 17 minutes. Glenn's eyes darted across the holographic schematics. Weak points flickered like open wounds. It was a predator's pattern, calculated, ruthless. But something stirred in his mind, a memory of desperate battles on forgotten fronts. Show me the shield grid configuration, he ordered. The technician hesitated, glancing at Caval. At the commander's curt nod, the display shifted, revealing the sprawling lattice of energy lines encasing the planet. Glenn studied it like a pilot studies the battlefield sky. His fingers traced phantom paths across the projection. They're not breaking you, they're hurting you, he muttered. Fila stepped closer. What are you thinking? Glenn's mouth quirked in a grim smile. Something impossible. She arched an elegant brow, so human. Turning to the room, Glenn raised his voice. The Draconids are using the codes Terrace gave them to pinpoint weak spots. What if we flip it? Make those weak points bait. Confusion rippled through the Nari officers. Caval frowned. Explain. We reconfigure the grid, Glenn said, his voice gaining momentum. Not to block them out, but to let them in. We create corridors of apparent weakness, funneling their ships into zones of our choosing. A honeypot trap. They'll think they're exploiting vulnerabilities, but really we'll be guiding them straight into concentrated kill boxes. Murmurs spread through the control center. Risky, unorthodox, but possible. Fila's eyes widened as the idea crystallized in her mind. We let them break through where we want, channel them into kill zones. She turned to Caval. It could work. Caval studied Glenn for a long, tense moment. Finally, his lips twitched into the barest ghost of a smile. Reckless, dangerous, brilliant. Do it. The technicians scrambled to adjust the shield lattice, guided by Glenn's rapid-fire instructions. He moved with the instinct of a veteran, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. Fila worked beside him, her intimate knowledge of Nari systems weaving seamlessly with his audacity. Together, they bent the shield to their will. At last, the console pulsed green. Reconfiguration complete, a technician announced. Apparent weaknesses established. Honeypot corridors ready. Glenn exhaled slowly. Now we see if they take the bait. The sky above Elysium 9 seared with light as Draconid ships hammered at the shimmering barrier. From the ground, the shield looked fractured, flickering with gaping holes. To the enemy, it appeared as though the planet's defenses were failing. They're concentrating fire on the false weak points, Fila reported, her luminous eyes locked on the tactical feed. Right into the trap, Glenn said grimly. The first wave of Draconid vessels surged through the apparent breaches. Their sleek reptilian craft darted into the narrow corridors like predators chasing wounded prey. But as they advanced, the shield's energy funneled them inward, herding them into designated zones. Now Glenn snapped. All batteries fire, Caval roared. From the surface, Nari defense platforms unleashed a storm of energy fire. Beams and missiles converged on the clustered Draconid ships, detonating in a chain of spectacular explosions. The sky blazed as dozens of enemy craft disintegrated. Cheers erupted in the control center. For the first time, hope sparked. It's working. Fila breathed awe in her voice. Your madness is actually working. But Glenn's gaze stayed hard on the display. Don't celebrate yet. The Draconids didn't come this far without backup. As if on cue, the massive silhouette of the Draconid command carrier loomed from behind Elysium's star. Its jagged profile eclipsed the light, casting a shadow across the battlefield. Caval's jaw tightened, the heart of their fleet. The carrier pulsed with energy, signals rippling through the enemy formation. Instantly, the surviving Draconid ships began pulling back, regrouping in disciplined formations. They've realized it's a trap, Fila warned. They're adapting. Glenn's mind raced. The trap had bought them time-inflicted damage, but it wouldn't be enough. They needed something more, something the enemy couldn't predict. Then Fila's earlier words came back to him. Our biochemistry has mingled. We've created something new. His eyes snapped to her. Fila, you said our bond created a unique biochemical signature. Yes, she said cautiously. Why? What if we broadcasted? Her brow furrowed. Broadcasted? What would that realization dawned, her eyes widening? You mean use it as interference? Our communication systems are partially biochemical. If we project our hybrid signature into their network? Glenn nodded sharply. It's like feedback in an audio system. Overload their comms, blind them. A stunned silence fell over the command center. Then a technician stammered. Theoretically, it could work, but the signature strength. We'd need direct contact. Fila finished, her gaze locking with Glenn's. Without hesitation, Glenn stepped close, pressing his forehead against hers. The gesture was intimate, primal, undeniable. Their arms encircled each other, bodies pressed together as if the universe itself conspired to make their bond real. Sensors flared, registering a biochemical pattern unlike anything in Nari history. Neither fully human nor fully Nari, but a synthesis, something powerful, something new. Calibrating array, a technician reported, professional voice trembling. Amplifying signal. The control center thrummed with energy as the broadcast array surged to life. The unique biochemical frequency pulsed outward, carried on energy waves across the system. The effect was immediate. Across the Draconid fleet, ships shuddered, communications fractured, coordination collapsed. Vessels veered wildly, some colliding, others firing blindly into the void. The mighty carrier itself flickered with static, its command relays overwhelmed. They're blind, Fila whispered, awe in her tone. Caval's voice thundered. All batteries fire at will. The planet's defenses unleashed fury. The sky became a storm of light as Draconid ships erupted under concentrated fire. The carrier, cut off from its fleet, reeled under the barrage. At last it turned limping toward the system's edge. Retreat. A stunned silence filled the control center, then it erupted in cheers. Victory. Against impossible odds, victory. Glenn pulled back from Fila. Both of them flushed breathless from more than just the bond. Did we just save a planet by hugging? He asked, half amused. Fila laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. Humans call it thinking outside the box, yeah. Caval approached his massive form, radiating respect. Captain Tate, Commander Kaveth, Elysium 9 owes you a debt beyond measure. Your bond, your madness, turned the tide. Glenn's grin was weary but fierce. Told you, impossible odds are kind of our specialty. 3 days later, Elysium 9 was a world transformed. The skies were no longer streaked with fire. The shield no longer shuddered under enemy bombardment. The Draconid fleet had retreated, leaving behind wreckage still orbiting like broken teeth. On the surface, the city buzzed with both relief and unease. Victory had been won, but at a cost, lives lost. Stars burned into memory, and questions that refused to fade. Glenn stood on the balcony of the diplomatic quarters. the fading sun painting the horizon in molten hues of purple and gold. He gripped the railing, watching the light spill across the alien skyline. Below, crowds gathered in the plazas, some celebrating, others whispering in clusters, their gazes often flicking upward at the human now living among them. Behind him, the door opened. Fila stepped out, her ceremonial armor replaced with a flowing garment of pale silver. Her hair was unbound, cascading like a waterfall of moonlight over her shoulders. She joined him silently, their arms brushing, as she leaned on the railing beside him. "They still look at us," Glenn murmured. "Of course they do," Fila replied softly. "You are human, I am Nari. We are unprecedented." "Unprecedented or unwanted?" Glenn asked, his voice edged with the weight of doubt. She turned, her luminous eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. "Unavoidable." She reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "We showed them something new. They will fear it, yes, but they will also follow it, in time." Glenn exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening slightly at her touch. Still shadows lingered, and terraced. Fila's expression hardened. On trial, High Commander Cavall insisted she face justice before the Council. She does not deny the transmissions, only claims they were necessary to preserve Nari purity. Purity, Glenn echoed with a bitter edge. Funny how traitors always cloak betrayal in noble words. "She will not see freedom again," Fila said flatly. "Her followers are fractured. Some already denounce her. Others will fade without her to lead them." Glenn studied her profile, the fierce strength carved into every line. "And what about us? They tried to use our bond as proof of corruption. Now it's a symbol. Does that sit well with you?" Fila turned fully to face him, her hand rising to trace his scar. "Symbols are powerful, but I did not choose you for politics. I claimed you because my instincts demanded it. My heart agreed. The politics are secondary." Her words struck something deep, raw, and unguarded inside him. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. "Then I guess I can live with being a symbol, as long as I'm still yours." A faint smile tugged at her lips, always. The council chamber was a storm of voices when Glenn and Fila entered the next day. Rows of Nari leaders filled the vaulted hall, their luminous eyes tracking the pair with a mixture of suspicion, awe, and barely concealed curiosity. High Commander Cavall stood at the dais, his presence commanding silence. "Let it be recorded," Cavall declared, his deep voice echoing, "that the actions of Captain Glenn Tate and Commander Fila turned the tide of battle against the Draconids. Without their ingenuity and their Bondalisium 9 would have fallen." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Glenn stood tall, resisting the urge to tug at his uniform collar. He could feel the weight of every gaze, alien assessing, dissecting. One counselor rose, her voice sharp. "And what of that bond? Do we not risk contamination of our culture, our bloodlines, our very identity?" Another counselor countered, "Or do we risk stagnation by clinging to the past? The Draconids adapt. They evolve. We must do the same or perish." The chamber erupted in debate, voices clashing like weapons. Glenn glanced at Fila, who stood at his side unflinching. He envied her calm. Finally, Cavall raised his hand. Silence rippled outward like a wave. Change is never without fear. But fear is no excuse for weakness. Captain Tate and Commander Caveth embody the strength of alliance, not its corruption. Let it be known the Council recognizes their bond as legitimate and symbolic of the unity between our species. Gasps filled the hall, some in outrage, others in relief. Glenn felt the air shift as though an invisible weight had settled on his shoulders. A symbol, not by choice but by circumstance. Fila's hand brushed his, a subtle gesture hidden from most eyes. "You are not alone in this," she murmured. That night, Glenn sat again on the balcony, data pad in hand. Coalition dispatches scrolled across the screen. The words made him blink, then read them again. "The United Earth Coalition has approved permanent liaison assignment. Captain Glenn Tate is hereby stationed on Elysium 9 to oversee the expanded Human-Nari Alliance." He set the pad down slowly, staring into the alien night. Permanent. No more drifting from mission to mission. No more 3-week deployments into the void. His future, his fate had been rewritten here. Fila appeared at his side, silent as a shadow. "You're staying," she said, not a question. Glenn turned to her, meeting her glowing eyes. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Her brow furrowed. Horses, he chuckled, shaking his head. Never mind, just something humans say. He reached for her hand, drawing her close. Point is, I'm not leaving. For a long moment, they stood together, gazing out at the alien skyline. Around them, Elysium 9 glittered with new life, scarred, yes, but unbroken. And in the quiet, their bond pulsed like a heartbeat undeniable. Fila leaned in, brushing her cheek deliberately against his neck, leaving the faintest trace of her scent. But this time there was no defiance, no warning, no possession, only affirmation. Mine, she whispered playfully. Glenn smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. Yours, and you're mine. In that moment, under alien skies, they were not symbols, not commanders, not pawns of politics or war. They were simply two souls bound by choice as much as instinct, carving out a future that neither species could have imagined alone. And though the shadows of new wars still loomed for the first time, Glenn truly believed that humanity and the Nari could face them together. Recovery on Elysium 9 was a strange blend of celebration and mourning. The city bore scars, shattered spires, craters where enemy fire had struck, and the silent absence of those who hadn't lived to see victory. Yet amidst the grief there was pride. Against impossible odds they had endured. Against an enemy that sought their extinction, they had stood defiant. And at the heart of that defiance, a human and a Nari had become inseparable symbols. Glenn walked the streets days after the battle, observing the reconstruction efforts. Nari civilians paused to watch him, their luminous eyes lingering. Some nodded in respect, others whispered distrust. But more and more the hostility was tempered with something else, curiosity, even admiration. He was no longer just the outsider pilot. He was the human who had turned the tide. Beside him, Fila strode with her usual poise, armor polished and her expression composed. Yet her hand brushed against his every so often, a subtle reminder that their bond was not performance, not politics. It was personal. They stare less with fear, now Glenn observed quietly. They stare more with expectation, Fila replied. Her eyes scanned the skyline where drones repaired the wounded shield arrays. They see us as the embodiment of the Alliance. What we do next will shape how both our species move forward. Glenn smirked. No pressure then. Fila's lips curved into the faintest smile. Pressure creates diamonds, does it not? I read that in your human literature. He chuckled. Yeah, but it also bursts pipes. Let's hope we're the former. The trial of Lieutenant Terrace was swift. The evidence Glenn and Fila had recovered was undeniable transmissions to the Draconid fleet orders, undermining defenses, attempts to fracture unity with propaganda. In the council chamber, Terrace stood unrepentant, her purple skin darker with fury. I did what was necessary, she hissed. Humans delude us. Their pheromones, their customs, their chaos, it is poison. Better to bend to the Draconids than become less than Nari. Her words echoed with venom, but they carried little weight. The council had seen her betrayals laid bare. High Commander Caval pronounced judgment with grim finality. You feared change more than extinction. That fear nearly cost us our world. You will live to remember that shame. Terrace was taken away, her influence shattered. Yet the echo of her words lingered in the chamber. Fear of change never vanished easily. Days later, Glenn found himself standing once more before the council, this time not as a defendant of his choices, but as an envoy of Earth. The chamber was quieter, now more measured. High Commander Caval spoke first. The United Earth Coalition has confirmed what we already know. This bond, this partnership has proven itself in battle. Therefore, the Council votes to formally expand the Human-Nari Alliance. The declaration sent ripples through the chamber. Some councilors applauded, others muttered uneasily, but none openly opposed. The weight of victory silenced doubt. Glenn straightened, his voice steady. On behalf of Earth, I accept. Our worlds are stronger together than apart. The Draconids wanted to break us. Instead, they've given us reason to stand closer. Fila added, her voice clear and firm. Let it be known that our bond is not corruption. It is not weakness. It is a choice. And through that choice, we have created something new, something neither human nor Nari alone could achieve. Her words hung in the air like a challenge and a promise. Slowly, applause began to build. That evening, the city held a gathering in the Grand Plaza, not a parade, not an official ceremony, but a shared moment of remembrance and resilience. Lanterns floated into the sky, glowing softly as symbols of those lost. Children chased one another between the glowing spires. Soldiers clasped hands with civilians. Glenn stood among them humbled. He had fought battles his entire career, but never had he seen victory turn so swiftly into hope. Fila joined him, her hand slipping into his. "This is what we fought for," she said softly. "Not just survival, a future." Glenn looked around at the alien faces illuminated by lantern light, then back at her. A future built on something no one thought possible. He squeezed her hand. "Us." She leaned in, brushing her cheek against his neck, in that familiar marking gesture. This time there was no possessiveness, only joy. "Mine," she whispered. He smiled, pressing his lips to her hair. "And you're mine." They stood there together as the lanterns drifted higher, twin silhouettes against the sky, alive with light. Later on the balcony of their quarters, Glenn read the official dispatch from Earth aloud. Effective immediately, Captain Glenn Tate is assigned as permanent liaison officer to Elysium 9. Duties coordination of defense, trade, and cultural exchange. He lowered the data pad with a dry grin. "Guess I'm stuck here." Fila tilted her head, studying him with amused curiosity. "Stuck." He laughed. "Bad choice of words. What I mean is, I'm home." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of war and politics falling away. Two people, two species standing on the edge of something entirely new. Fila's luminous eyes softened. "Home," she repeated, testing the human word. Then she smiled. "Yes, home." The war was not over. Draconid forces still lurked at the edges of the system, and whispers of other enemies beyond the stars spread through intelligence reports. But something fundamental had shifted. No longer was humanity an outsider in Nari space. No longer were Nari customs untouchable, unchanging. Together they had proven that difference was not corruption, but strength. Glenn thought back to the first moment Fila had marked him, her scent clinging to his skin, confusing and overwhelming. He had not understood then what it meant. Now he couldn't imagine life without it, without her. Their bond had started as instinct grown through choice and been tempered in fire. And like the alliance itself, it had emerged stronger for the trials faced. As dawn broke across Elysium 9, painting the city in shades of blue and gold, Glenn and Fila stood together on the balcony, watching the future unfold. "Whatever comes next," Glenn murmured, "we face it together." Fila's hand found his fingers tightening. Together she agreed, her voice both promise and vow. And as the twin suns rose, casting their light across a world reborn, it was clear that what had begun with one reckless kiss, one defiant claim, had become something far greater. Not fear, not domination, but partnership. A human and a Nari, two species bound not by chains or politics, but by choice, by love, by the unyielding belief that together they could defy even the stars.